Hello, how are you guys doing today? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to talk about Nintendo's updates to Nintendo Switch sales, as well as some potentially exciting information about when we might actually see a Nintendo Switch 2 and why that's probably going to be next year. So right now is a very exciting time because last night, in terms of the United States time, Nintendo actually held their financial investors update, and they gave a briefing on all of the sales of their best games and of course of the Switch hardware, which they do every quarter. As we know, every company does this, and it's always very exciting when Nintendo is going to give us these updates, because those of us who are fans like to know how many units the Nintendo Switch has sold, what the new sales updates for some of their biggest and best games are. I, of course, was looking forward to information about Metroid Prime Remastered, which we did get, and it is very great information, and I will be covering that in a separate video. As far as the Nintendo Switch, it's worth noting that as of Q1 of 2023, which was also the end of the fiscal year, so that's January 23 through March 23, the Nintendo Switch has now officially sold 125 million units worldwide, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, of course, with this information comes a lot of quotes and interviews and discussions from Furukawa and other folks at Nintendo about all things surrounding their business and the sales and the status of Nintendo, and the success of the Mario Brothers movie, for example, was a big part of the conversation, as well as the state of the Switch as it currently stands, the status of the still very strong but also heavily declining annual sales numbers, what their forecasted projections are for sales, and of course, the ever-present conversation about their next hardware, the Switch 2 or whatever the next-gen thing turns out to be, and when that might actually happen. And there's a lot of articles and stuff kind of summarizing these quotes. Wario64 on Twitter, who a lot of us know, shared a really great article from Nikkei about what Nintendo and Furukawa said about the sales, and that does also include a source close to Nintendo, so let's be honest about that before we look into it, a source close to Nintendo who had some very interesting things to say about their possible plans for the Switch 2. The article goes on to say that the Nintendo Switch makes up 90% of the company's entire revenue, and they go on to say the Switch is now 6 years old. We are, of course, now within year 7, and Furukawa acknowledged there are uncertainties ahead. In the history of our game console business, we have never seen 10 million units of hardware still being sold at this stage. We are now in unknown territory. He also commented on the sales target for this year. Given that recent year-on-year sales have been declining by more than 20%, the target of 15 million units is a bit of a stretch. And they go on to discuss the desire by a lot of fans to get some kind of new console or a Nintendo Switch 2. They say one is rumored due out next year. Quote, development seems to be progressing well, a source close to Nintendo told Nikkei Asia, but a product launch won't happen before next spring at the earliest. So there's a lot going on there, and a lot to take away from these quotes. Obviously, I think we focus on the fact that Furukawa and Nintendo are acknowledging the slowing sales, right? The declining sales of the Switch, which it has to be noted, and I mentioned this on Twitter, this isn't really a bad thing. So this isn't something that the biggest Nintendo fans or the biggest blinded, maybe defenders of the company need to come out and say, oh, this is a lie, this isn't true, it's not as bad as it seems, or whatever. It's not even really good or bad. In fact, it's probably more good than bad. Because, as Furukawa even said, seeing sales of more than 10 million units a year in the 7th year of any console's life is pretty staggering. It's unknown territory. So Nintendo is in this unique positive position where their sales are declining pretty drastically and they need to start thinking ahead. However, the sales have been so monumental for the Switch that even with a 20% declining sales, they're still in uncharted territory because declining sales are still higher than most consoles would see at this point in their life, if that makes sense. So Nintendo is in a fantastic position. And a lot of people are very emotionally tied to the Switch. That's something I've witnessed in the Switch era when it comes to fans of this console and fans of Nintendo. It's very strange. And so I think those who are so strangely emotionally tied to the Switch can't understand that it's okay to acknowledge that a console's sales are going to decline at some point within its life. And we're at that point. It's not a negative on Nintendo. It's not like Nintendo is making mistakes or anything bad is happening. At some point, you've sold Switches to enough people that less and less people every year need to buy new Switches. It's that simple. It's not a bad thing. This was always going to happen. And so that transitions us into this conversation about Nintendo acknowledging sales are slowing. They need to start thinking ahead. And so then we get this source close to Nintendo talking about a Switch 2 probably happening next year. So again, I've already tried to drive home the point that we're only talking about a source close to Nintendo. This is not official from the company just yet, so we're not going to take this as fact, but I do think that this is important, valuable information to hear, because coming from an outlet like Nikkei, I think that the source that they heard from probably has some merit. It doesn't mean that they're right, and this isn't 100% fact. But again, I don't think that they would be reporting it this way if they didn't feel that there was some kind of truth to it. So that's the disclosure I want to get out before I talk any more about this. And so what this source did say to Nikkei is that development seems to be progressing well on their next console, and that it's rumored to come out next year. So already development on Switch 2 for 2024 progressing well. This is all good information. This is something that gets me very excited because I am all about a Switch 2. As much as I love the Switch, I'm ready for next-gen Nintendo hardware big time. But then they go on to say a product launch won't happen before spring next year at the earliest. So this is the really fun part, because now we get to kind of talk about and speculate about some timing, right? And given that this is all happening in conversations with people who work with Nintendo, sources close to Nintendo, with reputable outlets like Nikkei and Bloomberg, and the fact that it's happening during a financials investors update briefing, which happens every quarter, this is all very exciting, and it all feels a lot more tangible right now than it has in prior conversations about this, right? So, to me, development progressing well means, yeah, they've obviously been cranking away at the next thing for a while, because Nintendo is smart and they know they need to be thinking ahead and planning ahead to keep up the positive sales of the Switch and the positive brand recognition for Nintendo that exists right now. Remember, Nintendo's brand power wasn't very strong during the Wii U years. Even though I loved the Wii U, and even though the 3DS was doing extremely well for itself, in the home console market, Nintendo wasn't a very strong name, unfortunately. Right now in the Switch era, it's a very strong brand, and Nintendo is smart enough to know they don't want to lose that, which is why I've been predicting for 3 years that they would try to carry strong Switch sales and brand recognition into the next thing. They don't want to wait for sales to drop down below like 7-8 million. They want to wait. They want to do this while sales are still probably over 10 million, so that everything just kind of carries over into a new generation. It's very obvious to me, and while nothing is fact yet, I think what we're hearing here kind of confirms some of that. And so now we talk about the idea of the product launch not happening before spring next year at the earliest, right? So I think that this is saying, at least this source is claiming, whether they're accurate or not, we don't know. But what the source is saying is that probably, they're basically saying, not even probably, I think they're saying 2024 Switch 2 is happening. So I'm just going to, for the rest of this conversation, consider that the thing that's going to happen. Next year, Switch 2 is going to release, right? Which is well before the 2027 year that a lot of people have been telling me for the past 3 years is when Nintendo's going to go next gen, right? And I've broken down why, because Kimishima in his brief stint did say that it's a 10-year plan, and I think people misinterpreted that, or maybe plans have changed, but I never believed 2027 was going to be the year Nintendo moves on. Way too long for that to happen. So 2024, we're looking at probably the Switch 2 releasing. Very exciting. It's a year away. And then the product launch won't happen before next spring at the earliest, so that means spring 2024, so what, March, April, May time next year, so basically a year from now, would be the earliest we could see it. Maybe it would even release at that time, which means the reveal of the console, I think Nintendo wants to emulate what they did with the Switch. They want to reveal the Switch 2 around 5 or 6 months before it would release, so I think that that means the reveal of the Switch 2 could happen at the earliest still this year in 2023 during this holiday. It definitely goes back to something I've been claiming and hoping for a very, very long time, you guys know, and probably get sick of hearing me say, but it is just something I've believed for years and have been predicting for years. And while it doesn't mean that it's correct yet, I just feel like in a world where the Switch 2 was going to launch next spring, like this quote says, spring at the earliest, if it's going to come out in like March, April, or May, then I think in October, November, or December of this year, 2023, Nintendo is probably going to be ready to show and confirm that the thing exists, right? Which brings us back to other conversations we've all been having for a while. Zelda is the big thing this year, and with the exception of Pikmin 4, it's the last big game we know Nintendo is releasing for the Switch this year. The back half of 2023 is completely open. We don't know about anything other than Pokemon DLC, I'm pretty sure, in terms of significant releases or first-party exclusive releases. And so what would they do with that time? If they don't give us reveals of surprising big titles to release at the end of this year, then I think their big plan for the end of this year isn't a huge new game. It's probably going to be the reveal of this next generation console. And if we take these quotes at face value, I think there's a chance they reveal it this year and they release it sometime in the first half of 2024. And man, I'm just being honest with you guys, it all makes so much sense. With sales still strong, they're projecting 15 million, but they're also saying it might be hard to hit that. And 15 million is significantly less than what they did last year. It's lower than their prior projections for this year. So things are slowing down, but they're still strong. And so if they can reveal a new console in 2023 where they're selling, 13 to 15 million Switches, which is still very good, they get to take strong sales, but also declining sales and kind of bell curve it before things get too low, and hype will be really strong for Nintendo at the end of this year if, I'm saying if, you guys, if they do reveal a new console at the end of 2023, people will be excited about Nintendo even though there's not a big game to play over the holiday and even though sales have been declining. After Zelda and after Pikmin 4, we'll all be like, what's happening next? Nintendo, without releasing a new game, can get a lot of hype over the holiday by showing us a trailer and a reveal and whatever about the Switch 2, and they could say it's coming out spring 2024, it's coming out in 2024, and everyone feels strong and positive about Nintendo. The outlook for Nintendo will be very positive in the minds of gamers and in the minds of the industry if all they do is reveal the next console this year. They don't have to release a game. If they do release a game, even better. Maybe we do get a big game to play this holiday, and that's great too. But just an announcement alone, this is all in theory, could do wonders for Nintendo over the holiday. And it lines up with everything. It lines up with the financials. It lines up with the Switch sales. It lines up with the declining year over year. It lines up with these quotes from a source close to Nikkei or Nintendo. And so I just feel like, and it's not just because I've been saying this for 3 years, although obviously I like to bring that up when it's relevant to a conversation, because I still could be wrong. And this all could be wrong. But it just makes too much sense. And I feel like we're on the cusp of seeing confirmation for a new console, getting an idea of Nintendo's future business for the next 5 to 7 years from right now. And I think 2024 is going to be very exciting, man. I think it's going to bring the next console. I think it's when we're going to play Metroid Prime 4. And if we're going to get a new Mario game or a new Mario Kart or whatever else they're going to do for that next console, I think we're going to start to see that come into focus in the next 6 to 12 months.